Hello everyone, and welcome to this Chamber Low Carbon live lunch and learn event, moving towards zero carbon with Kate Gilmartin. I'm Chris, I'm part of the Chamber Low Carbon programme team, and I'm hosting today's session for you. Some housekeeping before we formally start. All participants are on mute. Today's session is being recorded and will be available to watch again on the Chamber Low Carbon YouTube channel. We have two functions available at the bottom of your screen for you to interact with us during the event. Should you wish to ask a question, we have the formal Q&A button. If you put your questions in here, and these will be monitored by the team throughout, and we'll bring in the questions at the end of the presentation itself. If you'd like to speak your question, please indicate and we'll unmute you at the time. If not, we're happy to read out on your behalf. We also have a chat function at the bottom of your screen, and here you can introduce yourselves, post links, comments, and have a little bit of a network. For those unfamiliar with the programme, it's brought to you by East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce in partnership with North and Western Chamber of Commerce, Business-Wise Solutions and Boost. We support businesses across Lancashire to go green, save money and reduce their carbon footprint. So the slide on your screen now, we're part funded by the European Union Regional Development Fund, and this is a £6 million programme providing a suite of free services to help businesses improve their energy and environmental efficiencies, introduce on-site renewable energy generation, and assisting them in saving money. Move to the next slide, please. The programme also helps Lancashire businesses that are developing new low-carbon technologies and practices to bring their products to market, facilitate them being manufactured in Lancashire, and to help them find demonstrator sites within the region. Move to the next slide for us, please, Kate. Okay, just before I hand over to Kate, a little introduction. So Kate is part of the Rural Community Energy Fund. Easy for me to say. The RCEF is being run by regional hubs, and with Kate is here to discuss all things Lancashire. Kate also has a vast and far-reaching career within the environmental and technology sector to date. As a renewable energy consultant, she's performed investment, due diligence, technology feasibility and financial modelling for a various range of renewable projects, ensuring their viability. Notably, Kate has a specialism within the hydro generation sector. She has also held directorships at Community Energy Direct, IPS, My Green Investment, CIC, and she continues her work with the Micro Hydro Association, assisting and ensuring that community projects and beyond have the support that they need. I'll now pass over to Kate for a presentation. Who's not a dictator, by the way. I realised my Freudian slip there. I do apologise.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I was just thinking I'm not helped any dictatorships as far as I know. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak today. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about moving towards zero carbon Lancashire, and what actions communities can take towards becoming net zero. And as Chris said, I'm delivering the Rural Community Energy Fund across the Northwest. So I really feel that community level action is going to be key for us to meet the net zero targets within the UK. And the Rural Community Energy Fund is a grant that enables action within communities for them to look at projects that can decarbonise and lever community investment, and also deliver key projects within communities that are very, very visible. So this presentation, I'm going to give some details about the fund, about community finance and the community energy model, and case studies and the project pipeline that we're building in the Rural Community Energy Fund. So just a bit of background, as we look to achieve net zero, this is a calculator on the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy website, which is actually really helpful. And as you can see, it has all these little levers for different sectors. So we've got transport, buildings, industry, low carbon electricity, and land, bioenergy and waste. And each of these levers starts at the bottom and have ambition levels. So we've got ambition level 1, 0 to 4. So I've preset all these little levers to try and get us to 100% net zero by 2050. And as you can see, most of these levers are at the ambition level 4 setting, apart from carbon capture, hydrogen, nuclear, and tidal and wave. So I've not put those on the full ambition, they're on ambition 3. So if we look at, I mean, why I think it's important to show this is it just shows the breadth of what we need to do to achieve net zero. So, you know, ambition level 4 for most of these sectors to get us to 2050 net zero. And then if we look at the data kind of behind this neat little tool, it gives us information about those ambition levels. So, for example, buildings, you know, we're looking at behaviour, and we set it to ambition level 4, and that has things like changes in behaviour, like wearing jumpers indoors, and technology, smart heating controls, lead to building temperatures dropping to 16 degrees C. So I don't know what you have your heating on, but if I put mine less than 19 degrees, then my family get a bit cross with me, and I do wear jumpers indoors. But I just wanted to highlight that, you know, to actually allow these changes and these ambitions to be achieved, that takes a huge amount of behaviour change at very, very individual level. Again, when we look at building fabric and efficiency, ambition level 4 means that we have to achieve 80% of complete retrofit for our current building stock. Again, I don't know whether people have had any retrofit done. We did a renovation in our house and took the roof off. We did do internal wall insulation on the top floor of our house while the roof was off because it was messy enough. And it basically was back to brick and incredibly messy. So again, it's a very big decision for people to make, to have that very total retrofit done within their home. But yet the ambition level 4 that we need to achieve is determined by 80% of our existing housing stock having that kind of level of retrofit. Again, we look at heating systems, and ambition level 4 requires 90% of buildings to be heated by heat pumps. So again, a very individualistic choice to be made by people within communities to make these changes for us to achieve net zero. So, you know, part of achieving net zero, we've obviously got to 2050, we're in 2021, and, you know, the groundwork, the frameworks have to be set down over the next 10 to 15 years. You know, this next 10 to 15 years are really crucial in us delivering the whole suite of decarbonisation measures. So frameworks that we're thinking about now and implementing in the next 5, 10, 15 years will then drive the rest of the emissions targets, which are going to be the really hard ones to do. You know, we've kind of done quite a lot of the low-hanging fruits. I mean, at the time, I wouldn't have said putting wind turbines anywhere was easy, and it certainly didn't feel like it was easy, but comparatively to retrofitting 80% of the building stock within the country, it's going to feel, you know, much easier. So cracking this kind of delivery implementation nut over the next 10 to 15 years is really tricky, and we have to find solutions now. So we know what we need to do. I mean, going back to the My Calculator that Bays have done, you know, we have solutions of what, you know, what we need to do to get there, but it's the how, what's the delivery and implementation to make that happen that's really, really key, and also really, really difficult. So another really useful document, I've put the link on the slides, which I'm sure will be shared, is the local authorities' 6 carbon budget by the Climate Change Committee. And I just pulled out three quotes from this. The first one says, you know, top-down policies can go some way to delivering change, but we need to be focused through regional and local knowledge and networks, delivering place-based solutions. So that's really honing on the fact that, you know, communities can offer these place-based solutions. You know, local networks of SMEs, for example, they know their area, they know their clientele, and that kind of local knowledge is really key as we look to decarbonise. Again, highlighting here, over half the required emission cuts rely on purchasing or behaviour decisions made by individuals, businesses and organisations. So 50% of the emissions cuts rely on us, you know, people, communities making those switches. And, you know, to enable people to make the low carbon choices, the supporting infrastructure systems, information and skills need to be in place in local areas. So again, it's about talking about the frameworks and infrastructure for these solutions to be enabled, and what information do we need, and really, really key, what skills do we have and what skills are we going to need as we look to implement all these decarbonisation measures to achieve that net zero target. So that was just a bit of background about the massive challenge we have to decarbonise and how it's going to affect us all at different levels, whether it's SMEs or individual. And so my work is within the Rural Community Energy Fund, and that comes from BEIS, Business and Energy Industrial Strategy, and that money comes via the North West Energy Hub. It sits with Lancashire County Council, which is actually where I sit, although my role is regional. And the fund's worth £1 million. We've allocated about half of that so far to projects, which are either at feasibility or development stage. And my role is really to support communities, to help them scope potential projects, to help them look at how we can deliver those projects. I help them to get applications in. Usually they will come to us at stage 1, so they'll want feasibility funding. So there's availability for up to £40,000 for feasibility funding. And the stage 2, which is the development grant, so once we found that a project is feasible, we will then allow them to apply for development grant, which is up to £100,000. And that there's no capital costs within that funding. It's all for development. So for things like getting planning in, for environmental impact assessments, any other ecological studies that need to be undertaken. So it's a suite of things that will cover that, that grant money will cover a suite of things. So I work very closely with communities from a kind of seed of an idea to communities that come to me and say, we want to develop this project and we know exactly what we want to do. So I'm really happy to support communities all the way through. I then help them with applications which come into me, and then I present those to the Energy Hub Management Board for consideration and hopefully agreement. I think we've had most of our projects agreed. I'd say about 90% of our projects have been agreed at panel. So I've been talking a lot about community energy, but what is community energy? And it's usually an activity by a community of people who are joining together to look at low carbon solutions, whether that's energy efficiency or renewable energy installations. And people will get together and they'll formulate an idea of a project, and then they will set up a community benefit society. And this is a really unique form of society that allows communities to raise investment by issuing shares to their members. And they're actually allowed to do this by the Financial Conduct Authority. And they're the only type of society that can do that, which is why most community energy groups will form themselves into a community benefit society. They are not-for-profit organisations, cooperatives, and one share, you can buy one share in a project, or you can buy 10,000 shares in a project, but you will have one vote. And any profit goes into a community benefit fund. And the members of the society will allocate that community benefit fund in line with their articles of association. So most community groups will set up a community benefit society, and within their articles of association, it will say that all their endeavours are around energy efficiency or potentially fuel poverty alleviation and good works within their community. So it's a real kind of donut economics. People invest in a project. The project will generate revenue through sale of electricity, usually, and then investors will take a small return on that investment, and any profit will go into the community benefit fund, which is reallocated to the community. So why community energy? I mean, the community energy ethos is built up around collaboration and cooperation. Most people usually form together within their community because they're concerned about climate change and they want to do something proactive to look at decarbonisation within that community. We look at climate change and it is an egalitarian problem, and it's an all hands on deck approach. Often communities might have felt that they're left out of finding solutions. So it's very much a grassroots activism, but they also have a lot of motivation. They come up with innovation ideas, and they're very determined to create change. And I think it highlights the fact that there's no one big solution to climate change. It's about multiple small solutions, and community energy has to be a big part of that. I think there's a lot of, people often look for kind of the silver bullet, and is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be a tidal barrage, or something which is beyond beyond the conversation of communities that communities are involved in, whereas actually it's boring, but draft excluding, is important. A community energy group might buy themselves a thermal imaging camera and use that to go around their village or their community and look at where their housing stock is particularly leaky. And all those kind of things have to happen and are really important. And the way those community groups will engage with their community, it's a very passive approach, so there's no salespeople involved. They're trusted messengers within their community. They're not hard sold anything. So somebody might just say, well, yeah, you can have a look at my house on the thermal imaging camera, and yeah, I would like to see where it's leaking heat, and what I just need to put some more insulation in here, and do some draft proofing there. So it's all those small solutions which community energy is a big part of. The community energy sector itself has only been around for 15 years, and it was seeded by the kind of old Industrial Provident Societies cooperative, which has now transitioned to the Community Benefit Society. And there are a few projects, particularly a wind turbine in the Lake District in Cumbria, that set up as a community ownership using this old Industrial Provident Society cooperative, and everyone kind of looked at that and went, oh, we want to do that too. So this sector kind of sprang up from communities talking to each other about what they were doing, and it's been a really fascinating and empowering community to be within. And from those kind of nascent projects, Community Energy was set up, which is a kind of a sector body with membership from community energy groups. They do a lot of work with BEIS and MHCLG, lobbying for the community energy sector. And it's a real national network of people trying to deliver solutions to decarbonise. But they're not precious about intellectual property. There's a lot of sharing that goes on, and a lot of ideas and a lot of innovation that comes out of this sector. So the community energy model, I always like to be specific about the fact that it's not commercial development undertaken by volunteers and hobbyists, and it's not in direct competition with commercial developers. It has a very different starting point, usually coalescence of people within a community that want to do something, a very different angle of approach, especially around a community benefit society, a community owned asset that's asset locked as well, so people can't sell the project on. And the financial model is very different, because the community benefit society will raise money via share issue. And actually that is often a lot cheaper than going out to bank finance, for example. And yes, and looking at potential projects as well. So, I always think the community energy unique selling point is the motivation behind community energy, which is very, very motivated by green activity, and people wanting to put their money into something local as well. The tenacity and resilience of community energy groups, they don't cherry pick projects necessarily. They'll focus on a project that's local and make it happen, even if the returns aren't the best. So that's quite different from a commercial undertaking, for example. As I've said, the finance structure is very different, because it's raising money through community share issue. And the community engagement side, so one of the first things the community energy group will do is to engage within their community and say, okay, we've got this idea, we want to do a particular project, it might be hydro, for example, what are your thoughts? And that engagement is raising awareness about decarbonisation, why it needs to happen, about climate change, about what individual people can do. And again, that's very different from a commercial standpoint. Commercial developers will engage when they're at planning because they need to, whereas engagement with community energy groups starts at the beginning because they want people to join up and get behind them and produce that kind of community momentum. So a couple of projects here that are developed. One is Worley Community Hydro. So this is a group of people that got together in Worley, and they looked at their local, the weir on the River Calder, and they thought, right, okay, well, how, can we put some hydro turbine on that weir? And often hydro projects take a long time anyway, and community hydro projects generally take about 5 years, because they're very complex engineering projects, and you have to liaise with the Environment Agency, planning, there's a lot of work that goes into feasibility around hydro. But here we go, Worley Community Hydro developed a 100 kilowatt hydro electric plant, which started generating in November 2014. They set up their Community Benefit Society. They raised over £1 million by a share issue for the capital costs of the project. Any profit goes into their Community Benefit Fund, and that money goes towards education, towards energy in the community, and things like energy efficiency. So a really good example of a successful project. There's also Halton Loon Hydro. So that's Halton, just outside of Lancaster. Again, a similar time frame to Worley. They put 2 turbines in, 2 Archimedes screw turbines on the weir there. I think there's 200 kilowatts generated there. And again, it's a community share issue project. Both these projects were eligible for the feed-in tariff, which obviously has now gone. But yes, they will continue to generate revenue for the Community Benefit Fund for a number of years. Another project, so this is Greater Manchester Community Renewables, so I'm a member here as well. And this group of people got together and they wanted to look at getting solar on the roofs of schools, not only just because of the renewable electricity, but again, it goes back to that engagement side of things. So, having renewable electricity solar panels on a school is very visible, and it's a great way to engage the community in that wider conversation. So here we worked with various councils across Greater Manchester, but most successfully we worked with Salford Council, and we've got solar on 7 school buildings in Salford and 1 community building. Also, that project has then gone on to get further funding from Electricity North West to do an energy savers programs. So again, working with those school communities to help them save energy in the homes as well. And that's a great way of reaching hard to reach families, especially around fuel poverty alleviation. Unfortunately, with schools projects at the moment, the Department for Education has basically said that third parties can't put solar on school roofs anymore. So that is a big blow for quite a lot of community energy groups, because often the first port of call for a community energy group to look at a project will be their local school, because they're perhaps already engaged with them in some respect, so they have children there or they're governors. So it's a bit of a shame, but yes, anyway, that's the Greater Manchester Community Renewable Project. So the community energy model itself, I've did a bit of a flow chart to help people understand it. So what we're doing with community energy groups now is we're encouraging them to work with landowners or business owners to either put solar on business roofs or in fields even as well. So basically, the community will raise the finance to put solar on buildings or in fields. The community will raise that investment through their community share offer. Investors get a small amount of return on that, usually 4%, maybe a bit less now without the feed tariff. Any profit goes down into the Community Benefit Fund, and the landowner or business gets a discounted electricity. So, they'll still be buying the electricity, but usually they'll get it for 25% discount, and that will be linked to the wholesale price of electricity. Currently, the community energy groups that can apply for rural community energy funding are either charities, community benefit societies or cooperatives. We're also working with parish councils as well. So if you have got property or land that you think might be eligible for this kind of business model, please do get in touch. And what I'm trying to do is I kind of match make businesses or landowners with community groups that are established. Because often community groups, they might have done one project and then they're kind of looking for other projects that they can work on as well. So there's lots of interest out there for people who want to undertake community projects. and I'm happy to kind of try and match make those people. So I think one of the really important things, I think I've touched on this already, is about the ripple effect from community energy. So it's not just about an asset, a turbine or something generating electricity and profit. It's also a lot of that added value and social impact. So, communities who are undertaking projects have a certain amount of resilience. It gives communities a certain amount of empowerment as well. Often they come in contact with their local authority. Often the local authority will then actually look at what the community are doing and get their own ideas and start working closer with the community because they realise that they've got something to learn from the community as well. It brings the cooperative structure to community groups. The democratisation of energy. The fact is, for years and years, we buy our energy from someone somewhere, whereas the opportunity to buy locally generated energy brings a whole new financial model to the end. Well, yeah, a new kind of generation and revenue model to a local area. As I said, it's that ability to engage the wider community. If a local project is happening, then people are going to want to know about it, and they're going to want to know why those people are interested in undertaking a project. And because it's a local asset and it's community owned, people generally are quite happy to see that asset installed. So hence, although we've had obviously a moratorium on onshore wind for a number of years, there are a few projects in the southwest which have received grant funding for feasibility, but they're around wind turbines that are owned by the community. So it's much more palatable for a community to have a wind turbine within visibility if they know that they have a stake in that, and that any profit will be going back into their community. Obviously, community share issues, that's increasing funding within green investment as well. So once people have potentially invested in one project and they're getting a return on their investment, it's a bit of a feel-good factor because they know it's a local project and it's generating green energy. They will then look at other projects that they might want to invest in. Generally, share issues raise money quite quickly. So I had an email this morning. There's a project in Cumbria, Burneside, and they're doing, I think, 200 kilowatts of solar on a roof there on a paper mill, and they've raised half the money in 5 days. So there's often quite a quick uptake for these share issues. Excuse me. Community energy groups always want to bring new members in and get people on board, apart from anything, because it helps the workload. There's a lot of work and volunteer time that goes into these projects. So they engage their community for that reason, because they want to find an accountant or they want to find someone who's got planning experience. So it's that kind of, we'd like your help, please. Can you come and work with us? As I said, it's a really collaborative network. So again, we have a Northwest Community Energy Group that meets once a month, and people share what experience they're having, how much they're paying for solar panels, where they're getting their solar farm insured, for example. And there's also quite a lot of peer mentoring, so we can generally pinpoint who's done what where and help those people to buddy up and give advice. As I said about the Community Benefit Fund, that information sharing and there's a lot of general goodwill. I think anybody that's working in decarbonisation knows how hard it is and how much we do have to collaborate to get where we need to be. So that fosters a lot of goodwill. Volunteer time, as I've said, the amount of retired engineers that I come across are giving up, 39 hours a week to undertake projects is remarkable. And yes, I think projects that are once deemed commercial. So we've had quite a few projects that were being looked at by, say, for example, Good Energy. And when the feed-in tariff is now gone, when that was pulled, they pulled out of projects. And there's one project where the community has gone, okay, well, we'll take that on because actually we don't need that rate of return that a commercial investor would. So they'll take on projects that have less return and also that are higher risk as well, because it's on their doorstep and they want to see it happen. They are more likely to take on a higher risk project than a commercial group perhaps would. And I think I've just mentioned about retired professionals as well. So just a few of the projects that are being supported by Rural Community Energy Fund. So here we've got a project that has had feasibility funding, and they're just about to apply for a development grant. So they had feasibility funding of, I think, £16,000, and that looked at a site in Accrington, and we're looking to put 2 megawatts of ground mounted solar on that unused land, which is kind of tucked away. Because the feed-in tariff is gone, we're looking, that's obviously a big hit to the business model for any kind of solar project. We're finding that projects below 5 megawatts are really struggling to stack up without the feed-in tariff. And unfortunately, it means that any project to meet viability has to look for a high energy consumer that's nearby that we can do a direct wire to. So this particular project has a chemical factory down the road, and they have agreed that, well, we're in negotiations with them about a private wire and how much we would sell that electricity to them for. So the benefit for them is that they're getting renewable electricity from down the road that's locally generated. From a community social responsibility side of view, they are very visibly supporting a community benefit society that's not for profit, or profits go into the community. So from a CSR point of view, that's a good tick for them. And they are also going to be buying discounted electricity as well over long term. With the feed-in tariff going, although we're making anything under 5 megawatts is hard to stack up without a private wire, there are lots of kind of solutions that are coming through. There's loads of innovations. We look at what Octopus are doing and their flexibility and their agile tariffs. We look at battery storage and the flexibility markets. So, but we also look on the downside that potentially the more solar we have on at 12 o'clock on noon on a July day, are solar farms going to have to pay to put their electricity on the grid? It's called price cannibalization. Is that electricity going to have any value because there will be a glut of electricity? So there's a lot of potential pros and potential cons. It's very, the energy markets are very volatile. Oil prices are really low. It's really hard to do risk assessment because we don't know what the risks are going to be, because we don't quite know what the energy market is going to look like. But if we think that heat pumps and electric vehicles are going to have to, we go back to the net zero, my calculator, my 2050 calculator, and all those heat pumps that have got to go in, and all those electric vehicles that have got to go in, and all those electric vehicles that have got batteries in them are going to be sat there. So I think there's huge amounts of work around flexibility at the moment. So I've got quite a lot of faith that anything that goes in the ground now, with a marginal business case, I'm pretty sure that it will still have a good business case even in 5 years, even if we do have glut of solar PV, because we've got battery storage as well. And hopefully we're going to have a lot more demand side management and demand side response, even at domestic level as well. So this project now is going to development grant, so they will be able to apply for up to £100,000 to get them through planning, and ideally that development grant will get them to a point where they will be investment ready, and they will then do a share issue to raise the capital investment, and hopefully get that built out. So a really exciting project there. And now this is probably the largest, or one of the largest, community energy schemes in the UK. It's on the Cheshire Welsh border, and the RCEF are supporting them with finance with a grant for planning, which they're hoping to submit in April. And this is enormous. It's 30 megawatts, so approximately 49 acres of pretty low, well, it's very low grade agricultural land. It would generate 33 gigawatt hours of clean energy each year, and this is a community project, so it really shows the ambition and scale that community groups are now looking at, which is fantastic. So hopefully we'll find out more in April when that planning submission goes in. Another project, another large scale solar, so this is an 8 megawatt ground mounted solar. Again, it's kind of a 10 hectares of flat, low grade arable land, and this is looking to generate 7,500 megawatt hours, equivalent to 2007 houses. So this should meet a quarter of LIM's electricity demand overall. And what they are looking at, this community energy group, is to do a private wire to the local high school, which is going to be quite costly for them. But because they're a community energy group and because they've already got solar on all the primary schools in the area, you know, their next step is, well, we want to provide electricity, renewable electricity, to the high school. And even if, you know, it's going to be costly, that's our aspiration. So obviously that's not a commercial decision, that's a very community-based decision. But, you know, you think actually that's going to be a fantastic thing, that the secondary school will be getting all its electricity from the 8 megawatts with a 750 kilowatt battery as well for storage. So yeah, 2,000 tons per annum CO2 saved as well. So really, really significant project led by the community there. We're also looking at a hydro project. This has received feasibility grant funding. Hydro obviously is very expensive in the short term, so capital costs are high, but obviously you've got an asset in the ground that can generate electricity for, you know, 60 years and some. I was really keen to look at this project, but without the feed-in tariff, it's very hard to make these things stack up. So, but at this particular point, the community group had already talked to the hotel, which is, you know, kind of meters away from where the turbine house will be situated, and said, look, we want to do a hydro, but unless we can sell you the electricity, this hydro scheme will not have a financial business case that stacks up. So when they put their application in, they also had a letter of intent from the hotel to say, yep, we will look at buying as much electricity as we can from the hydro. So the hotel itself, it does have extension, which are all electrically heated. So they do have an annual consumption of 50,000 kilowatt hours, which is quite significant. Ideally, what we're going to be looking at is they're also, the main hotel is actually on oil. So we will be looking at how we can, what solutions there are to get them off oil. So we'll look at air source heat pump, potentially water source heat pump. And if we can switch them over to heat pump, then obviously they're going to want much more of that electricity that's generated from the hydro. We're also looking at electric vehicle charging points as well. Buttermere, I don't know whether you've been, but it's beautiful, and it's a very big visitor attraction. So the car park there is always very full. So there's no electric vehicle charging points at present. So ideally, if we can co-locate electric vehicle charging points, then we can sell electricity from the hydro to those vehicles charging, which again will give us more for the electricity generated. I probably should just say that I'm talking about the feed-in tariff going. The problem we have now is that to sell electricity to the grid, basically you get 4.5 pence per kilowatt hour for each unit of electricity that you sell. And domestically, we pay about 19 pence per kilowatt hour. So ideally, it's a bit of a meet in the middle. So if we can sell electricity to the hotel for 9 pence per kilowatt hour, they'll be making quite a significant saving, and we're doubling what we'd get if we had to export it to the grid for that really low wholesale price. So that's why we're talking about direct wires, where we're selling electricity directly to somebody. So yes, that's looking really promising as a project. The size, it sounds quite small at 40 kilowatts, but actually it's got a very high capacity factor, which means that turbine will be running for a lot of the year, and it will be generating about 240,000 kilowatt hours a year, which is quite significant. So opportunities in community energy. I already mentioned this. I'm really keen to kind of match make communities with businesses, with landowners. You know, communities have the motivation, the determination, and that kind of community energy business model that they can then work with, you know, with landowners. But also, I mean, we're talking to, there's obviously canals, railways, utilities, and the NHS. So I'm talking to one NHS hospital that's a secure institution, fairly remote, And I've said to them, well, look, we can talk to the local landowner and see whether we can do ground mounted solar alongside the hospital. Obviously, hospitals have a high daytime energy consumption, and it's a great match for that solar. For example, rail, there's a great project, thinking about innovation. This was a community energy innovation, Community Energy South in the southeast. They started talking to Network Rail about basically solar directly connected to the third track, so traction rail. And Riding Sunbeams is the project that's sprung out of that. And they've done a pilot project in the southeast, where they've done, I think, 50 kilowatts, but they're also now looking to build out a 2 megawatt solar array, which will go directly into that third rail. So we're talking to Mersey Travel in the northwest to see whether that's something we can replicate up here. I've already said about landowners, for example, the Lim project. They're talking he's a smallholder who doesn't really want to farm the land anymore, so he's really interested in the solar array there. You can actually co-locate sheep with ground-mounted solar as well, so it's a double income for him if he can still carry on grazing sheep on the land, but also generating profit from the lease of the land for solar arrays. So I'm really happy to talk to people and businesses about where this community energy model kind of fits in with what they're trying to achieve in decarbonisation. We're also looking at low carbon heat. So this is obviously a really, really tricky thing. We're looking at communities who are on oil, and how do we get people off oil? So we're basically looking at a village in Lancashire who are on oil, and can we've got funding for feasibility, and how can we get them on a communal heat network to get them off oil? But it's also the community energy aspect is we don't want it to work with the village. We want them to talk to people in the surrounding area who might be too far away to be on a network, but they can then start thinking about, okay, well, how do I get off oil? Can we look at group buy air source heat pumps or biomass boilers? What kind of energy efficiency can we look at? If the village is looking at retrofit, can we also include people beyond the village? So with community assets, community heat assets, this model would allow the community to own their own infrastructure as well. So it's about working with communities to inspire them to look beyond oil. There aren't that many solutions. They can either look at heat pumps, individual heat pumps, or potential for communal heat networks. So the project, a couple of projects that have been funded through the South East Energy Hub. So Firle is a community in Sussex, and Swaffham Prior is in Cambridgeshire. So the first is a village that of only about 84 houses. The second is a village with about 300 homes, both on oil, and both have both had feasibility and development grant through Rural Community Energy Fund. The Swaffham Prior Cambridgeshire County Council has really supported that project, and that's going to be built out this summer. So initially about 50% of the homeowners decided that they did want to sign up to have a heat connection with the communal heat scheme, but because of the engagement that's happened, very slowly people have gone, actually I want to be connected too, I want to be connected. So I think they're up to about 75% of the village is opting in to be part of this communal heat scheme. And it was actually on Radio 4 a couple of weeks ago as well, talking about this, and it's a real kind of trailblazing scheme. So we've taken their learning and we're using that learning to inform us in our copycat project at Chipping. So they are about to start their feasibility work, and I'm glad that we managed to procure consultants that were actually involved in the Swaffham Prior project. So that's really exciting. It's about 180 houses. It's a village that's not dissected by a big trunk road, because obviously if you want to start digging up roads, you've got to think about how that's going to be done in a way that's not going to be incredibly disruptive. So also working with Chipping, they've already got their barn broadband in there as well. So they've worked on community projects before, and they're really keen to look at decarbonising, and they know that how are they going to get off oil? What's the cheapest solution that they can come off oil, and what's the best strategic solution as well? It's worth pointing out that the government have got the Green Heat Network Fund, which is going to be opening in March 2022. So we're hoping that these projects, chipping and hopefully some other projects that we'd like to work with in Lancashire and Cumbria, can also follow in these footsteps and get Rural Community Energy Fund feasibility and development grant, but line them up ready to apply for this Green Heat Network Fund, which is up to 50% of capital costs. So that's our thinking, is hopefully have a suite of projects. And it's worth just saying, with projects like this, we're not just looking at heat, but also retrofit. So kind of taking a fabric first approach and looking at, what's it going to take 180 houses to become more thermally efficient? What jobs need to be created to actually, what skills are needed? What about the infrastructure? Who's going to put the pipes in the ground? What kind of skills and jobs does that create? And if we start thinking about scale, this is just one village, but how many villages are all on oil? We start appreciating how much work we've got to do and how many people have to be involved in that implementation to deliver these projects. And again, we've got another low carbon heat project, and this is at Kirby Stephen. This is actually affordable housing new builds, 22 units going in. And one of the reasons they've got funding for feasibility is that they're going to be looking about that ripple effect. So, how can we have a communal heat scheme within those 22 houses, but can we take it beyond those 22 houses? Can we look at zoning the village and looking at further schemes? This village, Kirby Stephen's on the gas grid, so how do we persuade people to come off gas, which is so cheap? We're not going to be able to offer them cost savings. We might be able to match the price of gas, but gas is so cheap. So the engagement aspect and the understanding of people's opinions about this are going to be really important in this bit of learning. Are people interested? If they're on gas already, if not, why not? And how are we going to make them interested? So I'm really keen to find out more as this project develops. I think also just the benefits, again, going on about community engagement, but if you're looking at heat and getting people off gas or oil, how do you have those conversations with people? You knock on the door and say, would you like some super fast broadband? And they say yes. And you knock on the door and say, would you like to come off oil and go onto a low carbon heat? And they say, well, is it going to cost me more or less? It's a really hard conversation. But I think the key about community energy is if it's led by communities, then you have that peer-to-peer information giving and advice. If you know that Sue down the road's connecting to this communal heat scheme, and you talk to her about why she's going to do it, then perhaps you'll be more likely to want to connect as well. So you have that motivation, you have that assurance around group buying and safety in numbers. It also kind of starts to normalise these changes in ideas and behaviour around energy that we haven't even started to look at yet. And this kind of community-led collectivism kind of brings its own momentum. So even if Chipping decide that communal heat project isn't going to be feasible, the likelihood is that at least some of those people in that village will have had the feasibility of air source heat pumps done, and they will switch to air source heat pumps. But how do you keep that momentum going? Also, when you think about the amount of engagement that has to happen, any kind of third-party agency with boots on the ground becomes incredibly expensive. And how do you get that? It's much better to have trusted members of your community giving you this advice or giving you information and sharing that. So yes, I've said, or I think I've said already, the really hard bit's engagement. It's also, when I talk to communities, I'm very, very conscious that climate change is very emotive and complex, and it does initiate very wide-ranging and unpredictable reactions. If people feel that they're being accused of not doing enough, they'll become very defensive and can be quite aggressive. So I think engagement and messaging is absolutely key, and allowing community members to have that engagement, I think is it's a much softer approach. Like I said, how do you persuade people to switch the heating system, to retrofit their home, to install solar, to fly less, drive less, buy less? I think community energy is a really kind of proactive, inclusive, place-based approach that's helping win kind of hearts and minds as we look at net zero and that big challenge we've got. Just a couple of statistics I put in here. I'm conscious that I've nearly run out of time, so I'll just whiz through these. But again, talking about skills, upskilling people for retrofit. If we create this demand for retrofit, how are we going to supply? What's the supply chain? Who's going to do it? This is from Bristol, this table, and they've estimated that currently they have less than 200 heat pumps, and by 2030 they need to get to 96,000 heat pumps. So who's going to do that? I think that's a really big part of the equation, is this who and how. And this is just some information from Bayes about the jobs that need to be created. 82,000 jobs by 2030. Energy white paper policies are going to support 22,000 green jobs. So, I tend to think of this low carbon transition as a massive opportunity for money to come into a region, but also for jobs and skills and added value. It's worth noting that a couple of projects in Cumbria that were going on with air source heat pumps, and the people who were fitting the air source heat pumps came from Northumberland and Carmarthenshire. And the question is, well, where the people fitting them locally? We've got to have these local capabilities to be able to achieve what needs to be achieved. So in conclusion, community energy, it's about empowering people and engaging them into low carbon action and delivering a local asset that's democratization of energy that also has community benefit as well. It's that kind of disruption from the typical model where we literally just, energy is generated centrally somewhere and then it's just sold to us and we just consume it. This is a really different way of looking at energy, that communities can actually own it, and then they want to buy their own supply as well. So we look at things like the local electricity bill and how we can actually sell directly to our own communities. It's about people voluntarily coming together to achieve that common objective for the common good. That brings an awful lot of goodwill and a lot of collaboration and cooperation, which takes place nationally. And also that added value. So the social impact, when we look at retrofit, this is going to hopefully allow a lot of fuel poverty alleviation. And those community energy members are trusted messengers within their own communities that certainly local authorities would struggle to do. Same with the distribution network operators or energy suppliers. And also, once we have community action networks, that has a certain amount of resilience. And I know at the beginning of COVID, a lot of these community energy groups were very, very involved with mobilising in action around COVID things. So mobilisation of community action is absolutely key in reaching our decarbonisation targets. Taking it right back to the beginning, when I looked at the My 2050 calculator, none of this can happen without those people on the ground working hard and encouraging everybody to look at decarbonisation. So thank you very much. I'm very sorry, I don't think I've left much time for questions. Chris, shall I stop sharing my screen?
No, it's fine. You can leave that one on while I go through questions so people can take your details. In terms of time, it's just as long as we've all got to take them. That's no problem at all. So don't be too conscious about that. The first one that I can see in the chat: is there anything stopping businesses being one of the shareholders if the business is in the community? So are there any restrictions on who is part of that actual community group?
No, absolutely not. No, businesses can buy shares as well. Absolutely. I suppose the only thing to remember is that, if, like I said, if you buy £10,000 worth of shares, you get one vote. If you buy £100 worth of shares, you get one vote. So you don't have that stake with those additional shares. But yeah, anybody can buy shares.
Yeah, just say that was so I didn't say Kate's name, but that was from Kate Pickup, who asked that question in the chat. See if there's anything coming in the main Q&A. Let's have a look at my own notes. What do you think the key barriers are, or myth busters, basically the perceived key barriers to setting up community energy that seem to put people off but aren't necessarily true?
Yeah, I think I think community energy is still seen as a bit kind of a fluffy, nice to have, and a bit soft, you know, bit soft, and oh, well, isn't that lovely if you can do it? Whereas, you know, hopefully in the presentation I've showed that actually community energy should be kind of front and center of how we decarbonise, because community energy groups have got a lot of soft power within their communities, and they know their stuff as well. They you know, they know their community, they know about energy, and they know what needs to be done. And I think that's really overlooked from, certainly from kind of, or maybe local authorities or businesses or larger entities anyway. From community energy people getting involved in community energy, I think sometimes they will be concerned about having a load of work dumped on them when perhaps they don't, you know, have enough time. But it's a very inclusive atmosphere in community energy, and even if people just turn up at meetings, they're welcomed. They don't actually have to take any actions away from a meeting. They just have to listen and be able to offer you know, solutions or raise issues that, you know, might be a problem. So it's very based on participating. So I'd like to encourage people to get involved, even if they feel like they're stretched for time. There's a lot to learn within this sector, and it's very fast-paced moving sector. You know, when you think about flexibility markets and digitalization of energy and smart meters and the data from smart meters, and how we use that on a household level on demand side response, you know, communities and community energy, people involved in community energy have a lot to say about the intricacies of all this. So yeah, the more involved in the sector, the better.
Yeah, that's good. Sort of half personal interest in all them. Well, I grew up in Warrington. I don't live too far away from that. Is it as technical as, you know, from the farm that you literally sort of unravel the cable and hook it up to the school, or is it just is that a technical term again? Just thinking in terms of infrastructurally, people might think, oh, I'm not close enough to send a direct wire from a community energy project to, you know, to a factory, to a school, etc. Or does it go into the system, but there's obviously, you know, infrastructural electrical costs based around that? It doesn't literally mean chucking a wire over.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, with the private wire, it is literally chucking a wire over.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
Cable. I mean, I'm not a big fan of private wires because we've got a perfectly good grid, and the grid, you know, it's slightly bonkers having wires crisscrossing over a grid.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we can't get the money for selling electricity directly to the grid. You know, you get 4.5 pence per kilowatt hour. You can do something called a power purchase agreement, but it still means that your electricity goes directly into the grid. But, you know, say the council will buy it at a slightly elevated rate, for example. But you know, selling literally directly by chucking a cable means that you're bypassing the grid and you're bypassing that wholesale price, basically.
Yeah. We've got
it's expensive. It's expensive. I mean, you know,
yeah.
Anything more than a kilometre would be cost prohibitive.
Right. I see. Got a couple of questions in the bottom as well, just before I bring those up. You mentioned obviously schools is one, you know, a natural place for good open roof space, which has kind of been curtailed slightly. But we do have a number of factories and clients that, I'm not saying definitely want to do it, but people who have sort of explored the questions in and around solar and things like that in our interactions with Chamber Low Carbon. There are some large free areas on factory roofs in Lancashire. That's still a thing that a business, again, there's different angles in which a business, they don't necessarily have to be part of the community, which would be ideal and perfect, but there's different ways which they can get it, from being all in with their share, using their factory roof space, having a private wire, or just finding a community energy group where they can purchase their electricity from. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think with factory roof spaces, I suppose, I mean, I'm talking to a group in Greater Manchester, and they're talking to a factory owner that's got a big roof space. And the benefit of the factory owner is that they don't have to come up with the capital for the solar array,
yeah.
But they're buying discounted electricity. So, you know, anything that they can offset using that electricity that's generating on their roof will give them a discount.
Yeah.
But also the community benefit side of it means that if it was a third-party commercial entity, then they know that somebody's kind of making a profit off their roof.
Yeah.
Whereas with Community Benefit Society, they know that actually, yes, somebody's making a profit off their roof, but that profit is going to be ploughed back into their local community.
Oh, good. I've got a question from Peter. It says there seems to be a favour towards heat pumps within the presentation. How do we introduce new technologies that may offer different and more viable solutions? I assume that is into the community energy sort of argument. I take it we've kind of got with what's acceptable and what's the norm, and not everything is going to be particularly ruled out in community energy. It's just these are key examples.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably say, I mean, that's my fault, Peter, for just saying heat pumps, because that tends to be what government says. But I mean, certainly a community group I was talking to yesterday in the southeast, and they've actually put in at one of their projects, they replaced existing gas boilers. It was in a kitchen showroom. They replaced the existing gas boilers and they put in sun amp phase change heating, which I've heard of before, and so I was asked the question, how's it performing? And they said fantastically. So yeah, certainly there should be other technologies involved, and often community energy groups will look very broadly at innovations as well. So this community energy group came up with this, let's use sun amp phase change heating in that particular project. So yeah, that's my fault for putting heat pumps when, yeah, I mean, certainly broader scope is of interest as well to most groups.
That's good, interesting. I mean, again, you can only do so much with what's available in terms of examples. That is understandable, especially trying to get our message across. But is there anything that's seemed to be prohibitive, or is it if the right constructed argument is made by community energy groups, is that just part of the tender process if they're trying to set up a community energy group and reach funding, or are there some sort of key barriers where the funding before it gets off the ground would be not necessarily looked at? I mean, in a polite, professional way, of course, but
yeah, I mean, like I said about the hydro project, I basically said to the group there, unless you can get the hotel on board, we won't be giving funding because the business case can't stack up. So, usually I will do a certain amount of work with the group to make sure that I think that the project is likely to be feasible, rather than kind of very broad brush scoping where I mean, that's where my background in renewable energy consultancy comes in, because I can generally work with them and discount certain things. I mean, that's from a technical point of view, from a business, I mean, that's not from a technical point of view, it's more from a business case point of view. And we've all, when the feed-in tariff went, we were all being kind of like, oh God, how are we going to make this stack up without the feed-in tariff? And there seems to be new optimism that projects are coming through that do stack up, although limited to potentially having to have a private wire, which isn't ideal. But from another point of view, I mean, wind turbines are still incredibly divisive and contentious. And I would always say to a community, do you really want to take this on? And I shouldn't be dissuading communities, but certainly I kind of think that, they've got to be within their community. They could pop to the local shop. They don't want to be shouted at because somebody doesn't want a wind turbine. So from a political point of view, I sometimes do say to people, just, have a real good think about what the impact will be on your local community, and, do some engagement work to find out how well that's going to go down.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. Do you have possibly have a little bit more, or very likely have a little bit more knowledge of me in terms of planning? I know you referenced it within the presentation for onshore wind. Just based on where are we up to with that? Because I know it wasn't favoured, and is there a size and a scale that kind of is more accepted in terms of planning? Sort of community and objections and stuff aside, just as a general rule, does a mast height and a turbine get to a certain level or a certain number before it becomes tricky and is seen as a major project? Or a community, all being well, would a community project go through if all the community was engaged and involved and it was of a certain scale?
I mean, it depends what's in the local plan, but I think that if a community is behind a wind turbine development, I think from a planning point of view, as long as it's not clutter. So I always say to communities, well, if you want to do a wind turbine, just look at one big turbine, because from an idea of clutter, that's less contentious possibly, but certainly the projects, I'm following quite closely what's happening in the southwest, and those projects are coming through the Rural Community Energy Fund. They've not hit planning yet, but they've got very large scale community support. So it's generally thought that community support will be heavily weighted in the planning decisions.
Yeah. In terms of, oh, sorry, go on. Sorry,
I
go
was
on.
just going to say, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I suppose from a size perspective, you know, planners will always want it to be smaller. So I don't know, to be honest. It's whether you go smaller in a few or bigger in one.
Yeah, that's understandable. In terms of your experience and sort of cross-pollination from what's going on in other communities, in particularly very different parts of the country, just by, you know, if you were on a train and you ran through all the landscapes and so on, I would assume bar solar getting better returns in the southeast, southwest. There's not huge amounts of differences in terms of what kit would generate or what community schemes would generate, but is there different types of appetite for different types of project, or is something like that known? Are things in Lancashire going to fall a little bit more on deaf ears than they would say in Exeter or in Essex?
Yeah, I mean, I think with community energy, it's all about how advanced the community sector is in an area. So the southwest and the southeast have got a lot more community energy because they're very well supported by organisations. They've got Regens, which is a really, and Centre for Sustainable Energy. So they do a lot of support for community groups. We're a bit further behind that in the northwest, but from a technical point of view, you know, we're in the northwest generally, we are very behind with solar development. You know, in the southeast, there are 2 projects in planning which are interesting, but they're 500 megawatt solar projects, which is absolutely enormous. Unfortunately, neither of them got any community benefit at all. So with wind turbines, obviously they were legally obliged to give £5,000 per megawatt to a community benefit fund. So, you know, there's quite a lot of community benefit funds in the northwest directly from offshore wind or onshore wind farms. That there isn't the same allocation with solar. But when I looked at solar across the northwest, we have a fraction of the national solar, and I do think that's going to change because solar prices come right down, and I think we'll probably get a lot of solar development going on across the northwest, and especially Lancashire. And we still have grid connections in Lancashire as well, whereas there's a lot of constraints, for example, in the southwest around grid constraints there. So that's hampered their development. But we've not got much solar in Lancashire yet, but it'll come, I think.
Yeah. Anything in the terms of sort of social demographics as well? I mean, you can spin an argument whichever way you want with facts, but I was sort of had half an ear in those Electricity Northwest. I think the project you mentioned with Electricity Northwest, the community project that went on to the school and had further funding as part of the Chambers and Chamber Low Carbon's involvement in their sustainability panel. That idea was, it was the focus group or one of the items on the agenda. And some of the queries that came up is how do you support people who need the access but don't necessarily have the resource? I'm thinking maybe more affluent areas, especially now education and awareness of our subject area is a lot higher in terms of the energy and the environment. They sort of seem to have the hands-on access straight away, but how do you level up people, and is that a good way for community energy to do that? Is it a good option for people to get involved where otherwise they might not have had that access?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think I probably didn't mention it in the presentation, but a lot of the community energy ethos is about social justice as well, and that kind of democratization of energy and involving everybody in this decarbonisation, no matter what their demographic is and their access to their own resource. I think what we're trying to do in the community energy sector as well is to tie in with what the housing associations are doing. And they are real trailblazers in innovation, especially around things like putting domestic solar and batteries, and then looking at kind of balancing that out with octopus agile tariffs, for example. So how does that work for fuel poverty alleviation? And I'm really keen for community energy groups to work alongside housing associations to find out what their knowledge is and what they've learned from their pilot projects, and how we can transition that to other communities as well. And I'm hoping that the government fund that came out last week, I think it was Community Renewal Fund, that's heavily focused on decarbonisation and also skills and low carbon skills. So I'm hoping that as a community energy sector, we can work with councils to look at some of those questions.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff. I've got another question from, I assume it's the same Peter, I just get her first name. So it's a random question. Has there been any research done to which technologies may actually have a negative effect on the resale of homes that sign up?
That's a really good point, and that point got mentioned. I was on something yesterday about new builds and whether a central kind of an ESCO, so an energy service company, can actually own solar that's on somebody else's roof, and how that affects resale.
Yeah.
I think it can be a problem if it's third-party ownership. So a long time ago, when the feed-in tariffs were quite new, you had the rent-a-roof scheme. So developers would come along and say, we'll put solar on your roof, you don't have to pay for it, we'll take the feed-in tariff and you can have the free electricity. And that became a bit of a headache for resale, as did the Green Deal, where people took loans out essentially to do all retrofit and energy efficiency works, but then the loan was attached to the mortgage, and that became a bit of a headache as well. I think if something hasn't got an ownership issue, i.e. if it's just solar panels on the roof and they're generating electricity, then they should be seen as an asset, because basically you're displacing your own electricity consumption with free electricity that you've never had to pay for. So in that respect, I don't think it's a resale problem, but certainly if there's third-party agreements, then that can be a barrier, definitely.
Okay. I don't think we have anything else that's coming on a question front, so just a last one from me. Obviously, we're Chambers because I got half a foot in each camp, really, but what more can the Chamber and entities like ourselves and businesses do? How do we get, what would be a good way for the Chamber to get this, to further get this message out? I know something I can take from this, and when I speak to people in my day-to-day with the help and advice and the options that people have to them, is it a case of looking at the link on your slide that you're showing at the moment and just immersing ourselves in a bit more information when we do help and give advice?
I think, as I mentioned, the Community Renewal Fund, that's going to be looking at, okay, how do we decarbonise? What's it going to take to decarbonise? Where's the supply chain at? How advanced is the supply chain? Where are jobs and skills at? Who is out there that can do this, and where are the deficits? And I really see kind of chambers and SMEs have such a big part to play in that, because we can provide demand, we can look at what demand there's going to be, and we can kind of model that demand, and we can kind of calculate how many jobs we think are going to be needed. But then how does that slot together with what's there now, and who's going to do it, and who's going to upskill those people? Like, what training resources do we need? How do we build a supply chain that's going to be able to deliver all these infrastructure projects and the retrofit as well? So I think there's so much crossover, and I think what communities are going to be good at doing is getting that demand and that engagement, and then the SMEs are going to have to kind of work alongside communities to make sure that we can deliver and implement.
Fantastic. Just have one last check. Yep. So there's no more questions coming. If you could just drop to the next slide for me, Kate, unless you've got anything else to add yourself. And that's our Get Social slide. So if there's no further questions, I'd like to thank you very much for today. It's been really helpful, really informative, your time and expertise, obviously second to none. So thank you very much for giving us the time and presentation that you have done. Just a couple of final notes. We've got our Chamber Low Carbon Virtual Expo, which is due this summer, we've formally held it in one of the hotels, but under current circumstances, we're going virtual. And that's on the 2nd and 3rd of June, 2021. In the coming weeks, we're going to have a bit more blurb for people to digest and see programs and what types of speakers are coming. So please keep an eye on the website. Equally, please keep in touch with us on any of the social media channels that you can see on the screen there, and our Eventbrite page as well, and that'll keep you up to date with when and where our next events are, because we do have quite a few in the book or due to be in the book before the expo, as that's a few months away. Anything else, you can contact the team directly. You can look at the Chamber Low Carbon website for help and advice and resources. Let's just say thank you all for coming, and thanks, Kate, again. Hope everybody has a lovely day.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, thank you. Goodbye.